I talk a lot on my channel about mind integration as part of the spiritual awakening process, but what does a completely integrated and ascended mind feel like? In this video, I'll explain how the mind changes through awakening and what you can expect once it's fully integrated and you've trained your consciousness to ascend. What's going on in your head day to day is one of the easiest ways to know where you are in your awakening journey. When I'm working with awakeners, I ask them to describe how their mind operates, or if they can't articulate it, we do some exercises together. And that gives me a ton of information about where they are, what techniques they need to use, and what they can expect next. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll show you one of these exercises for you to try at home. I'm not going to talk about how the mind works in this video because I've got other videos on this topic which I'll link you to in the description. So I'm going to assume that you already know that the mind is made up of 4 compartments which represent the body, the ego, the earthbound soul, and the higher self. Now, as we move through the awakening journey, we progressively integrate the ego, soul, and higher self, which is in the upper dimensions. Now, when we're born, we're already fairly well integrated with our higher self, and that's necessary to protect the soul because this place is basically weird, and being closed up in a body is weird for beings which are just energy in their natural state. So this early integration is the reason that so many children remember past lives or have paranormal experiences. But as we get older, things change. We become used to the idea that we're a human being. Society teaches us that we're an individual, and depending where we are in the world, we're also taught that there's nothing more than 3D reality. And as a result, this integration between soul and higher self, the data pipeline as I call it, starts to atrophy. Now, by the way, I'm talking in generalities here. Everything I'm going to tell you is broadly typical for most people, but of course there are exceptions, including people who never lose their early connection to their higher self. But for most of us, the connection wastes away and our mind becomes predominantly ego and body led from quite a young age. These are the unconscious and subconscious zones of the mind respectively, which together make up the lower mind. So we end up in a place where we have very little connection to higher self and very little control of our thoughts unless we're lucky enough to have been introduced to meditation or mindfulness. And that's why the majority of people think of the mind as being a big jumbled laundry bag of all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff that we can't control. And pre-integration, that's kind of true. What happens pre-awakening when we're largely led by the lower mind is that these two voices are shouting about whatever is worrying them the most at that particular time. So the symptoms of an unintegrated mind are jumbled thoughts, monkey mind chatter, negative feelings like anxiety or sadness, lack of emotional control, lack of impulse control, self-limiting beliefs, and a tendency often towards petty thinking. For example, we might be judgmental or jealous or self-righteous. Now, when I list it out like that, especially to an audience of awakeners, I'm sure it sounds pretty horrible. But if you cast your mind back to long before your conscious awakening, or you look around you at people who aren't on the awakening path, you can see that this is largely how it is. Even good people are subject to these kinds of conditions. And in all honesty, it's kind of a mind prison. It's not a fun place to be, and it severely limits our potential, which is what awakening is really all about. So what happens when we start to wake up? Well, let's talk about pre-conscious awakening first. This is the very early stage which can go on for years before our spiritual epiphany, the moment that we realize we're in some kind of process. During pre-conscious awakening, we're usually doing a lot of inner work and self-improvement. We're clearing our energy centers, which is another important strand of the awakening process, and we're reprogramming our lower mind and starting to move control upwards to the conscious mind, the seat of the soul. Now, if you've ever used CBT as a therapeutic tool, that's exactly what it is. It's a reprogramming technique. Hopefully, you're also exploring spiritual practices like yoga or meditation, or perhaps you're meditating by stealth, as I call it, because you've taken up a creative hobby or you've started spending more time in nature. All of those things aid integration with the higher self, and they have a beneficial effect on the way your mind works day to day. So we reduce negative feelings, we have more emotional control, usually we build confidence and self-esteem, and that means overall that our mind is more peaceful. We still have a lot of monkey mind chatter unless we're meditating a lot and meditating regularly, but even then we'll still have some. We also tend to become more aware and more empathetic, and these are all symptoms of a mind that is in the process of evolving. Now, when we get into conscious awakening, the time when we know for sure that we're going through a process, things get really interesting. Now, this is what I call the connection phase, because it's when we become super connected to the universe and we start to intuitively understand ourselves as souls, and we understand that our universe is multidimensional. Now, the thing about the connection phase is we actually get launched into a bit of an artificial process. All of our chakras are opened up simultaneously to a huge degree, so we have this enormous throughput of energy, and we're also given the experience of being highly integrated with our higher self. And probably the majority of you watching this video are somewhere in the connection phase right now. It is really common for people at this stage of awakening to think that they've completed the journey and to think of themselves as ascended. Now, I did that myself, so I completely understand why it happens, because in a way, we are ascended, but it's artificial and it's temporary. We still need to do the work once we're out of connection to reach that state of being again under our own steam. And there is a big difference between the experience we have during the connection phase and how our minds operate at the end of awakening, because by the end of connection, the soul and higher self are only 50% integrated, but at the end of awakening, they are 100% integrated, and we've also upgraded our tool of consciousness and we've trained it to ascend. So, for the remainder of this video, I'm going to compare and contrast some of the main ways that the mind typically operates during connection versus the end of awakening. During connection, your lower mind still has a toehold, so you still have monkey mind chatter and you still have negative emotions. They should be reducing, but they're still there. However, by the end of awakening, you literally have zero chatter. Nothing at all from lower mind. You should go through a period of time when there is no noise in your head at all, unless it's your higher self or guides talking to you, or it's you yourself consciously generating a thought with your conscious mind, the seat of the soul. There is one weird thing that you might experience, however, once your mind is fully integrated, and this is a voice that I call Cosmic Siri. It's an aspect of the conscious mind, and it's designed to help you in your mission. It's a bit like an app. When you go into meditation mode, Cosmic Siri will run through the things that you need to do or replay things that happened recently, which it wants to make sure you've noticed. Now, you can easily switch Cosmic Siri off if you'd rather sit in silence, but if you're at that stage of awakening, then I'd encourage you to give it a few minutes at the start of meditation, because it can actually be really useful. You will also find that the further you progress through awakening, the easier it becomes to know which part of the mind is talking to you. This typically starts to become really apparent after the spiritual dark night of the soul, when the mind is overall much quieter, so you can notice thoughts and the source of the thoughts more easily. You can sense the individual compartments. At the end of awakening, however, you'll find that these compartments have mostly integrated, so you operate more or less as one entity. You'll hear the occasional thought rise up, but by and large, you are one being. Also, by the end of awakening, you are fearless. You might have the tiniest tremor of worry from time to time if you haven't kept on top of your protocols and maintenance, but it is completely controllable, and you can use reprogramming techniques to remove it instantly like that. Another notable distinction between the connection phase and the end of awakening is that during connection, we're usually still quite emotionally volatile. We can get really, really up to the point of euphoria, but we can also get really quite down. But at the end of awakening, we've attained a state of neutrality, basically inner peace. So you'll probably have moments of that during the connection phase as well, because you're being given the experience, but it's not a steady state like it is at the end of awakening. Now, what about communication with your guides and your higher self? Well, during the connection phase, you become acutely aware of signs, messages, and synchronicities. Sometimes it's as though the dial has been turned up to 11 and they're really just shouting at you. And usually at this time, most communication is in the form of images or symbols or just a sense of knowing. We need to work out what it is we're being told. But that's completely different at the end of awakening. You still receive signs, but they're very, very subtle. Your awareness is so heightened and there's so little going on in your mind that you're finely attuned. The littlest flicker of something is enough for you to know what it means. And also for the majority, I think, because I need a bit more data on this, but by the end of awakening, you're conversing with your guides verbally. So there's very little need for interpretation. They're just telling you what you need to know. And that's within the limits of the rules of the game, of course. However, by the very end of awakening, you can go long periods of time with no communication at all because you don't need it. Your consciousness has ascended at least part of the time, or you can easily elevate it if you need to go and find information. And that's how it's supposed to be. The awakening process ultimately aims to put us in the position of power so that we're almost entirely self-sufficient. That means that our team's energy can be used to help the next person along the path. So finally, another big difference between the connection phase and the end of awakening is what happens when we go into a state of trance. Trance is the condition which occurs when our lower mind is put to sleep and our consciousness ascends. The most extreme version of trance we have available to us is lucid dreaming, outside of using psychedelic substances. Meditation is a state of trance, so is self-hypnosis. And the majority of you watching this video, I'm sure, have experienced this condition at some point. Now, if you're in the connection phase or any of the earlier stages of awakening, trance is an abnormal condition for you. Your lower mind is still very active, and your consciousness has a long way to ascend to reach the upper dimensions. So trance feels very different to your usual state of mind. You're transported away from 3D reality and you find yourself somewhere else completely. But by the end of awakening, your lower mind has only a very small influence on your overall system. Ego is mostly integrated and the body is running a basic maintenance program. Also, your consciousness is already elevated and you've already opened up the furthest reaches of the mind. So when you meditate, there is no sensation of going into trance. You are basically already in trance. You're in a permanent state of trance. Okay, I said I'd teach you a technique to assess where you are in your mind integration process. So here it is. All I want you to do is find and hold a state of no mind, complete neutrality. That means no thoughts, no images. Now, if you're unable to do this, you are probably in early awakening. If you can do it for a few seconds, but then it gets interrupted by monkey mind chatter, you're probably in early connection. If you can hold it for a minute or two before it gets interrupted, then you're probably in later connection. If you can hold it for a good period of time and also keep your eyes open at the same time, you're probably in the advanced learning stage, which comes after the spiritual dark night of the soul. And if it's your default state of mind that you maintain the majority of the time, minute by minute, hour by hour, then you are either in transcendence or ascension right at the end of awakening. And you can find out more about the mind and consciousness in this video.